Thank you so much for joining us here at The Research Her, the show working to improve the health disparities for women of color, one topic at a time. I am Alicia. I'm here learning and growing with you as we research our way to well-being. Hey, y'all, back with another bomb guest, okay? So today on the show, we have Dr. Indira Turney, who is a postdoc research scientist at Columbia University's Medical Center in New York City, where she does research on Alzheimer's disease and the aging brain. And she graduated from the University of the Virgin Islands with a Bachelor's of Psychology. During her undergrad research career, she was a member of several academic and non-academic organizations and honor societies. She also pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She went to earn her Ph.D. in Cognitive Neuroscience from Penn State University. Her dissertation focused on reducing false memories and examined training-related changes in brain function in older adults. Dr. Turney's current research focuses on using molecular, structural, and functional neuroimaging to identify socio-cultural sources and correlates in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias amongst racial and ethnically diverse older adults. I can't wait for you all to dive into this episode with us and join us here on this conversation. Okay, we have Dr. Turney on the line. Thank you for being here.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Really, I am.
I'm happy you're happy. Let's get into it. I like to start off the interview with some warm-up, icebreaker, get to know you and what you're thinking right now questions.
Okay.
So what's the last song that you listened to before you got here?
The last song I listened to was called, who is it? I think it's Christopher Martin it's a Caribbean artist, and it's Me and My Friends Were a Big Deal. It's is it
How did it make you feel?
It makes me feel great. Like whenever I'm like feeling terrible or just like, like tired, then it kind of reminds me like I'm a big deal,
So is that the premise or the argument of the song? Like, hey, I'm actually the shit. Like, is that what
pretty much. Like, and not just me, but like my friends. So it's like me and my friends were a big deal. So like it also reminds me like the people around me are a big deal. Like you're not like, associating yourself with any and anyone. Like you guys are all a big deal. So if you need help, you can reach out to people, you know what I'm saying? And so it kind of helps me in multiple ways. One, gives me a little boost to be like, yeah, you're a big deal, but also remind me that there's a lot of people around me that are also big deals, And together we're like unstoppable. So
yes, and that's how it should be. Your friend should be just as bomb as you are, okay?
Right, exactly.
Exactly. So name one thing that you wish didn't have any calories.
Any calories?
Just that you could just eat and like just not a pound.
Ooh, anything.
Just only one thing. It has to be the one thing.
The one thing. It's like there's this Caribbean. So Caribbean soup, it's peas and dumplings. It's always one thing in my mind because it's a soup. But it has dumplings and maybe provision and maybe pig snouts or chicken or whatever. But essentially it's just a red bean soup. And I wish it had no calories because then I would eat it all day, every day. Whenever I cook it, I eat like 3-4 bowls. It's so embarrassing. But that's my favorite meal.
And so you can make it with different types of like, you can put different things in it, right? So then it was like, well, you could switch it up.
Sometimes I put potatoes, sometimes I put sweet potatoes, plantains, bananas, dumplings. I think the main part that most people have is the red beans and the dumplings. And whatever else you put with it can vary. The meat varies, but I like all versions of it. All versions. That's okay.
That sounds delicious. So if you could break the law one time, what would you do?
I would set everyone free in prison. Like, I don't know. I would like set the alarm off and let everyone go away and like have no one find them.
What about the murderers? What about them?
Oof. I think there's a place for everyone. I think there's a different way that you can, apprehend someone or correct them and give them the right, help that they need. And I don't think prison is the answer always. And so I would set them free and give them the right care somehow. I don't know, not me. And then I wouldn't have to get in trouble for it.
That sounds like you trying to break two laws. We don't like to give people proper care in this country.
I know. It's so sad.
Okay, so the last icebreaker. What is your ratchet pleasure?
See, which one? So I mean, I feel like a lot of people look at me and they're like, "Oh, Indira, she's doing her thing, da da da." But at the end of the day, I'm Caribbean, so I don't even want to call it twerk because we don't call it twerk. But I can get down, when I have to, and you'd be like, who are you, And so I think when I go to Caribbean festivals or music and jams and stuff, I just let go and I let loose. And if my hands have to be on the floor and my foot in the air, then so be it. So yeah.
Okay. I love it. And that's not even ratchet. That's exercise. I wish people would stop calling it ratchet. It's called.
I know. I feel this is my culture. What do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So. Okay, let's get into it. Tell us where you're from and just a little bit about you.
Okay, so a quick trajectory, I guess. So I'm originally from Dominica, which is in the Caribbean. I was born and raised there. Then I moved to St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands, at 14, which is when I finished high school there. And then I went to the University of the Virgin Islands on St. Croix. And then what happened after that? Then I moved to Pittsburgh, where I did a pre-doctoral program before grad school. And then after that, I moved to Penn State, where I did my Ph.D. in Pennsylvania as well. And then now I'm in New York City doing a postdoc.
Mm-hmm. So did you always know from the beginning of little wee baby Dr. Turney, did she know that she was going to be a cognitive neuroscientist?
Ooh, child, no, not at all. Not even close. So I remember when I was younger, I always used to be in the backyard, beating the dashing bushes, it's a plant, and they would be the kids in the classroom, and I would just be shouting at them and tell them to sit down. I wasn't teaching them anything really. So I thought I wanted to be a teacher, but not for the right reasons. And then as I got older, I wanted to be a lawyer. Again, not for the right reasons. I just wanted to wear a short, tight skirt and shout at people. And, and just shout and be like, Your Honor, whatever, or I object. I don't know, whatever they say. And then I went to college, and then I realized I didn't like history or political science. And those are two crucial things to be a really good lawyer. And so I was like, oh, well, I don't know. So I was actually undecided for a long time. I think up until my sophomore year in college. And even the background of getting to college for me was kind of weird. And I don't know how much details you would go
No, into. I would love for you to say, what was your journey to college? Because if you're saying I actually didn't know if that was for me anyway. And now you have a whole Ph.D. Give us all of that.
So I think so. It started so I finished high school on St. Croix at 16, and I had applied to colleges in the United States. And so as a 16-year-old Caribbean child, my dad was like, you're not going anywhere. So even though I applied and got into schools and stuff, he was like, you're not going. And I was like, well, if I'm not leaving the island, I'm not going to school. I didn't want to go to college anyways. I was just going so that I can get away from here. And so after that, I think I worked at a supermarket for about a month. And then me and my dad would keep getting into it. I don't know, I'd probably get into trouble. And then he shipped me off to the British Virgin Islands, which is nearby to the U.S. Virgin Islands, to my mom, because at the time she lived there. And so he shipped, my 16-year-old self over there. And then
I'm tired of this. You're crazy behind. You need that black mama in your life who gonna get you right.
I sure did. And he took, so at the time I only had so from Dominica to the Virgin Islands. So the reason I came to the U.S. Virgin Islands was because my dad filed for a green card so I can come there. He took the green card and he shipped me to my mom. So I can't travel back to the U.S. at all unless I have the green card. And so I was like, okay, fine. I don't have any use to be here anyways. And then unfortunately, my grandmother passed in the November. And so he came over, and then I had to go to Dominica for the funeral. And so he was like, well, if you want to come back to St. Croix, you have to apply and go to school. And I was like, fine, I'll apply to UVI. I don't really want to go there because it was the only university on the island. And at the time I was just like, I don't want to go there. It's too close to home. Anyways, I applied. Then I started the spring semester. And at that point, I think I had just turned 17. And then, so I went there and I was like, as soon as I'm 18, I'm leaving. Because by then you can't tell me anything. But one thing led to another, and I didn't leave UVI at all. I ended up, I think, had almost failed a psychology course, actually, my sophomore year. And I had failed Science 101. And I was just like, what is this? Like, this is easy. Like, why am I failing? And so I went to my advisor. What's that?
I was going to say, why were you failing? Like, what was it about the courses?
Psychology, I failed because I never opened the textbook, and I just thought, this is psychology. I know this, whatever. And then Science 101, I failed because I never used to really pay attention to details and all the labs and stuff. It was just so detail oriented. And I was just like, oh. So I would get points off and stuff for the simplest of things. And I'm like, I know this, but I just didn't, work out something properly. And the professor, she was a stickler and she was known for people to fail her course. And Science 101 was almost like the OChem class for the US, where you get weed out of colleges, like your major if you're in chemistry or something. And so if you were not really meant to be in science, you would get weeded out from that with that class. And so that was the reason for that. And then so essentially mid-semester, it just so happened that my advisor was my psychology major advisor as well. So I was like, hey, why am I failing this class? And she was like, maybe you should open the book. And I was like, and so I was like, I guess. And so then I started actually reading and, understanding the stuff. And I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And so that led to me also opening up to her about what I want to do. And so my grandmother had dementia, and I always wanted to really understood what happened because it happened when I was much younger. And so she was like, oh, I think you'd be a really good experimental. At the time she said experimental psychologist. And so I was like, I don't even know what that is, but sure, whatever. And so then she
sounds good.
Right. And so she kind of took me under her arms and would recommend all kinds of stuff, do research here. So I would go off to summer research from starting my sophomore and then my junior year on the mainland. So I went to University of Iowa for a summer and then Ohio State another summer. And that kind of opened up my mind. So the one I did in Iowa was basic social psychology or something like that. And I knew I didn't like that topic, but I got experience with statistical methods and more the research on what it is. Because like I said, I didn't even know what research was. And then the second year I did a more clinical neuroscience program, but it was in patients with MS, multiple sclerosis. But it exposed me to understanding the brain and aging and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what would help me actually, kind of understand what happened to my grandmother. Because I never thought I could understand it. Things happen. And you just kind of think, okay, well, I don't know, that's kind of weird, but I didn't the mind, and you study dementia, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And so one experience led to another, and then those experiences were also part of summer research opportunity program. It's actually a NIH funded program for minority students, and so they would have other things with the research experience. So for example, they'd have GRE courses or tell you about grad school. And so that's when I learned about grad school, and I was like, what is a PhD? Because at that time I didn't even know what a master's was, farthest for a PhD. And so through those programs, I got informed about what a PhD was. And then one experience after another led me to actually, fine tune what I'm interested in when I know but yeah, so it's kind of one thing led to another. And then eventually I started actually doing well in school because I actually started taking school seriously. And I think it was really crucial that my advisor, kind of put me in those situations. And I said yes. And I started going to conferences and traveling more and just being exposed to the whole PhD process and people more. And then I applied to grad school, my first right out of undergrad, and I got into no grad school, no programs. And I was just like, well, this is terrible. And it was a humbling experience to me, honestly.
How many programs did you apply to?
I had applied to maybe 11 that year.
11?
11.
Oh, that sounds expensive.
I know. And so it was just a waste of money. And I was just like, okay, well, all right, I guess I won't do anything. But it was more humbling than disappointing. Because then I think by the end of undergrad, I kind of was on a high horse, because I was
Because you
doing
had did all this research
right.
experience.
I was
Yes.
going traveling all over the place, and it was all paid for. I was like, these people think I'm Stella. Like, I am the cream of the crop. Like, nobody can touch me. And then it was like, nobody wants you for grad school, girl. Nobody. And I was like, oh, shit, I guess I'm not as good as I thought I was. And so like, that was really humbling. And so what I did was, again, someone recommended that I should apply to a pre-doctoral program. And so I did apply to, at the time, there was only 3 that I knew of, which was Tufts University, Columbia University actually had one, and University of Pittsburgh. And so I applied and I got into University of Pittsburgh. And I don't think I even remembered waiting for the response from the others because I was just so excited to get into something and leave the island. So I just took the first one. So essentially what it was a year of coursework, getting research experience, and then I reapplied to grad school. That year I applied to 9 programs and I got accepted into 7 out of 9 of them. And so it was really crucial because first I had applied to clinical psychology because I thought, if you want to study Alzheimer's, you have to be clinical. And so obviously they could tell that I wasn't truly a clinical psychologist.
And did you want to be that, or was it just something that it came up? You're like, hey, why not?
It was just like based on the summer experiences that I had. So the last research experience I had before applying to grad school the first time was in a clinical neuroscience, in a clinical neuropsychology lab. So I just assume this is the closest kind of work I want to do, except it's in multiple sclerosis patients, but I want to do it in Alzheimer's patients. So it made sense to apply to that. Not thinking about all the other clinical stuff that came with it, which I thank God that I did not get in. So while I was at Pittsburgh, I worked with a cognitive neuroscientist, and that's when I got exposure. And I was like, wait, I can still do all of this without the clinical stuff. And so that's when I realized, okay, this is what I want to do. And so I applied, and of course my statements were stronger. When I took the GRE the first time, I did not score very well. I scored way better the second time because I actually took it seriously. And then
did you study the first time that you took it?
I know. I was just like, it was also, I had a mentality that, Black people test terribly. So whatever. Like, I think my SAT scores were, I don't know, maybe 200 points. I don't know. It was terrible. It was terrible. Out of like 1,200. I don't know. It was like really bad. And I was just like, whatever. And then also coming from the Caribbean where we just don't really do a whole lot of standardized
testing. Yeah.
So I was just like, I don't know, I'm going to fail, whatever. So I'll just take it anyways. And then the second time I actually buckled down for 2 months and studied, not every day for 2 months. I think I started for 2 months. Okay. And then as you get closer to the actual test dates, I studied more and more. So like maybe the last month is when I actually studied almost every day. And the last 2 weeks, I studied every day for like 10 hours or some crazy thing. And so that was beneficial. And unfortunately, I think there's way too much, emphasis on the GRE. But, at the time, that's what you needed. And so that definitely helped. But I think also the biggest thing was kind of knowing what I actually wanted to do. And also like getting more networking opportunities and more research experience, because everyone that I applied to the second time around were from the PI, so the principal investigator, who was in the lab that I was working with. And he knew, based on what my interest was, who's doing that kind of work. And so he would tell me, why don't you check out this person's website and look into their work, contacted them. So I was way more involved in the graduate application this time around and was more confident about what I wanted to do. But like, long story short, I think it was just a matter of, I didn't care about college because I wasn't really brought up in a culture where it was like, you have to go to college. It was pretty much like in Dominica after high school, which normally you graduate at 15, 16, and then you probably go to a community college for a year or 2, and then you're like a grown-ass woman. And so like, you're done. Like, you don't think about anything else. You probably work in an office somewhere, and that would be fancy enough, a lawyer's office or something. Or it was either that or you become a medical doctor or a lawyer. So it was those two. And I was like, I don't really want to do any of those things. So, and so then when I got to St. Croix, I kind of like went back almost into my past. Or in Dominica as a 14-year-old, I was almost grown. And then I moved to the US and now I'm a child again. I was like, what is this? And so like that kind of like forced me to kind of just take a step back and then realize, there is this thing called college. Okay, I'll go. But it was only because I wanted my green card and I wanted to come back to St. Croix. And then I was planning to leave after 2 years. But then because of like mentorship and being exposed to different experiences, that made me me stay on and graduated from UVI. And then because of those experiences, I applied to grad school eventually again. And then I actually did the program and all that stuff. But it was never something I ever in my mind, like I didn't, you think of a scientist and you think of a white coat over a bench, some white old man,
Yeah.
So it's something I aspired to be at all. But I'm glad.
So I love it. I love everything you said. I was gonna say, like, I've seen like this common theme. So I'm interviewing people, I'm getting to know a little bit about their stories. And when it comes to becoming a scientist, whether that be a social scientist or more into the what do we call the other sciences? What are those sciences again? Physical sciences. So the one that I do.
Hard. I don't know.
Regardless of what science that you're going into, I'm noticing that a big part of the success of our Black women, because that's who I've really been interviewing, is having a professor or a PI or advisor who believes that you can do it. That's just the common theme I'm seeing. And it runs true with your story. You had an advisor, or what you say, PI, or what?
At the time, it was my undergrad advisor, yeah.
So your advisor, you had an advisor tell you, like, hey, you should try this out and do X, Y, and Z. And you were like, okay, I try it out. Why not? You gonna pay me? Oh, okay, let's do it.
Exactly. That's the thing, because all of the experience were paid for. So I was like, I have nothing to lose. Sure, why not? But it wasn't like from a place of passion, because I think like we're often just
we don't even know.
Right, we just don't know of the options, and we don't have these parents that are affluent and telling us, this is what you're going to be and this is how you get there, and let me put you in this school and this opportunity because I know this is what you need to get to there. I did well in science courses, but it wasn't something that I thought was going to be something I could pursue as a career, so it just kind of happened. And thankfully you have those advisors who have hope in you and guide you. And thank God that my dad didn't send me away to like Boston University, because I would have been the little Caribbean girl in Boston.
And you may not have been given these opportunities.
Because at UVI, it was a small liberal arts college, and it's the only HBCU outside of the U.S., just saying. But it was, an opportunity for people to have more one-on-one interaction with their advisors, and they can see, potential and actually give you the feedback you need versus being 1 out of 200 in a classroom, So, yeah, I think it was, everything happens for a reason. And in the time, of course, I was just like this man, but really worth it in the end.
So how did you choose your PhD research topic and I guess you choose your advisor first and then you choose your research topic?
Yeah, so I know in some programs you get to go to the university and then you're in, say, if you're in neuroscience or any of the other sciences, you kind of just rotate through 3 members in a year, and then you decide which one is better. I didn't have to do that, thankfully, because I was in a more interdisciplinary program with both psychology and neuroscience. And so I chose my advisor before going to grad school. And that was, again, like I said, based on my mentor during my predoctoral program. He had given me a few names, and then I looked up a few people and see the kind of work they did. And then I'd go into conferences. I looked at the kind of work people were doing, and I just kind of reached out. Like I cold emailed a lot of people and just was like, this is what I'm currently doing. I'm interested in your work. Are you looking for grad students this year? Here are my GRE scores. If I have the GRE scores at the moment, maybe we can talk on the phone or something. And so over time, I applied to the people who said they were accepting students, and that I think made a big difference too. And then once I got there, again, it kind of just happened where I knew I wanted to study aging and memory at that point because of just previous experiences. But the lab I was working in studied false memories, which at the time I didn't even know what that was. It was more, so a false memory is a memory for something that didn't happen. That's what we were studying. And I got really interested in that because false memories are also influenced in dementia. And so initially I wanted to do dementia work because that was my initial calling. But my advisor at the time had promised that we would have gotten that kind of experience, but one thing leading to another didn't happen. It was still good experience for me to understand a lot of the brain processes in just normal, healthy aging first, as well as in young adults. So we studied young adults and older adults. And then now that actually set me up really nicely to now apply all those principles to dementia-related type agings. This topic kind of just happened. Like, you start working on a project, you come to the lab, they tell you, oh, why don't you try out this thing? Like some grad student before tried it and it didn't work. Or Yeah, they just want to give you some busy work, try out this experiment. You have an idea? Sure, why don't you try it? Nobody cares. And then something works and you're like, oh, I have results, I have data. And then,
yep, they don't know who you are, not knowing that you about to come in and shut the lab down. And
so it was just kind of like one thing led to another. And then I actually got interested in it and then started formulating your own ideas as you go along. And it's just kind of like, I think, you kind of go into grad school thinking I have to study X, Y, Z, but you just kind of let the data tell you what you need to do because something's going to pull you,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your actual research?
Right now.
I'm sorry. Your PhD research. So you mentioned that it's about false memory, but can you get into more detail?
So I had in our program, it was divided into two kinds of main projects versus I know a lot of programs just have one main dissertation from day one. So I had a master's thesis and then I had a PhD thesis. So for my master's thesis, my project was on types of false memories in young adults and older adults, or I collected data on both young and old, but for the sake of my master's thesis, I only presented on the young adults data.
Yeah. Can you tell us what the difference between what cuts you off and makes you young versus old? What did you use?
Yeah, so for our sample, we had 18 to 30 for young, and old was 65 and older. I think 65 to 85 was our cutoff. And so essentially just looking at the different kinds of false memory. So whether it's a memory so again, the thing that triggers a false memory is when things are too similar. And so I was trying to figure out at what point does something have to be too similar for it to induce a false memory. So what inspired this was going back to a rape case. I don't remember the name, but essentially it was this white girl who was raped by this black man. And more or less, she kind of just remembered a big nose, his general facial structure. And this is a famous case. And he went to prison for years. And then 10 or 15 years later, DNA test is what proved that he was innocent. And there's down this whole innocence project about it. And they were collaborating together, which I think is interesting. But, all of that stuff. So
you got feelings, it seems like.
Right. But that kind of initiated the original idea of, okay, so she had a false memory for this black man and she generalized whatever she remembered to this other black man. And again, because of no biological evidence, all they had was her testimony and she had a lineup and she was able to look at the different faces and just say it's this one because this is the closest one to the guy who actually raped her. And so I was like, well, how similar to avoid problems like that in future, how do you kind of place these people in a lineup but have different enough faces or where they're not too similar or maybe they're very similar but not passing some kind of threshold that would make them have a false memory for the other person. And so more or less kind of seeing at what point in the brain is the brain able to detect and say, okay, this is very similar. I'm just going to generalize it and say I saw this before versus it's similar but not similar enough where I can say it's familiar, it looks familiar, but that's not who the person was. And so kind of seeing how the brain, grapples with that was my master's thesis. And we had some really pretty good results, actually. Don't ask me what they were, though. And that was in the younger adults. In the older adults, they followed the exact same trajectory, but just probably at a higher rate of false memory for each category because false memories are just usually higher for older adults because, their brain break down more and the processes break down. But it was interesting to kind of see there is a breaking point as to when you can say something is going to induce a false memory almost. So you can almost predict that the brain is going to react in a certain way to have a false memory if something is too familiar.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting, right? Because I can't remember where I saw this at or maybe heard it. I just can't remember right now. But there is research out there that shows that people from different races, they have an easier time identifying people within their race than people outside of their race. So as a black woman, I would be able to easily determine the difference between black men. But if something were to happen, I had to identify different white men, they would just all look like the same person to me.
Yep. And that's exactly the same thing too. So that was I guess a secondary analysis that I would have had for my dissertation, where so I used faces of people from different races: Black, Hispanics, whites, the Asians, like all kinds of different subgroups, and I had people essentially look at the faces while they were in the MRI machine and made a response as to, do you remember this? Do you remember all the details? Do you remember some of the details? Do you remember no details, kind of thing? And it would have been interesting to look at the white people responding to the white faces, the Asian people responding to Asian faces, and see if they were more accurate with the races within their group. But I was in bumfuck Pennsylvania, and so
you didn't have too many options.
Exactly. So I had like one Black person and one Asian person in my study. And that was in the older adults. In the young adults, they were college students and they were all white. I recruited some of my friends. So I probably had like 5 or 6 Black people who were my friends. And so, who participated in the study. But again, it wasn't enough for me to, compared to like 50 other white people, to say this is true to only like your response is based on your race. So I couldn't do that analysis, but thankfully it wasn't the main point of my dissertation. But that's definitely something other people have shown, that within race, you have some within race or outside race bias. So like, how that people say you think all white people look the same? It's kind of similar to that. But again, that's not like my research focus, but it's more or less the way we're used to seeing Black faces, where we know the different configurations, we're more familiar with it, we've been exposed to it more. And so
I would love to see a study where they look at how people outside of like Black people can identify like Black women and Black men with different hairstyles. So like they just see it, like if you just put up the same face, different hairstyle, and just see how easily it is. Like it would be very beneficial, I think, for our police academy or something like that, where we
wouldn't be surprised if they have. I know, because the other thing was like the face, most people who do those kind of work are like face processing or face memory people, and most of the studies I see with faces, they actually remove the hair, like, so it would just be a circle over the face, which for my master's thesis I didn't do that, because I was also interested in, are you going to remember the hairstyle, and like changes in hairstyle should matter, because again, no one wears the hair the same all the time, at least Black people. And so, but unfortunately, most of the face processing researchers just look at, because they only care about the specific configuration of the mouth, nose, lips, eyes, and they think the hair is a distraction. But again, that's because, again, most Black people are not in studies, which is kind of leading to like my postdoctoral work. So they're not thinking about the fact that most Black people are mistaken just because they changed their hair or they cut their hair or they got a shape up, and so it's not something I think that they mainly focus on, unfortunately.
Yeah. So how was it when you were pursuing because you speak a little bit about your postdoc. So how was it pursuing your postdoc position? Like, did you have some non-negotiables when you were picking a lab?
So I had healthy aging experience in grad school, and so I knew I wanted to definitely do dementia work. And this was my last opportunity to start delving into like Alzheimer's and related dementias. And so that was one definitely like non-negotiable, being able to do dementia research. Another non-negotiable was kind of being able to publish first author manuscripts, because a lot of times postdocs are seen as, oh, you're an expert, you're going to come into my lab and do all the great things that you do and help my lab, right? And some people don't focus on mentorship and realizing we still do need some mentorship and training, because otherwise we would have gone and, start our own lab. But obviously we still need some mentorship and to learn something else, So for me, my main learning something else was dementia related work and applying more advanced methods than what I already had in grad school. So those were the two main things. And then that kind of comes in line with having, because in order for someone to really mentor you, so not only being able to learn new things, but also being mentored, was you need to have a mentor and not a boss. And I will say, like, my mentors are amazing. Also somewhere that I wouldn't say a non-negotiable, but it was definitely higher on my list than grad school, was like my well-being. So like overall mental wellness was on my list, as far as I didn't want to be in another I'm the only Black person here kind of area, because I was like, okay, this is the point where I'm finally not so sheltered in grad school. I'm living my life. Shit, I might need to find a husband. And and I need to be in a place where I'm happy and free and living my life. And now I kind of have the choice, hopefully, to be able to choose locations like that. So the places that I interviewed were in Detroit at Wayne State, in California, nice and sunny, and at
Nice and
Stanford.
sunny. Yes. Oh, I love California.
I know. I mean, Stanford itself wasn't quite as nice and sunny as LA, but it was better than PA.
I'm sure.
Exactly. New York actually was not on my list at all. And I also interviewed in New Jersey at Rutgers. I was more aware of being able to have a life, and so the environment and research, making sure all those things match up. I had one postdoc opportunity with this guy at Rutgers who was pursuing me from 2 years before I graduated. And that came about where my undergrad advisor, again, we're still in contact. She was doing some kind of collaboration probably with him. And she mentioned, oh, Indira is interested in this kind of stuff, da, da, da. She was like, you should reach out to him. And so I kind of just sent him an email oh, hey, my undergrad advisor told me you're doing this work, and to, maybe potentially I could do a postdoc with you in the future. And then we kind of stayed in contact from since then. I would visit the lab occasionally and just kind of get a sense for what they're doing. And so in my mind, I had already had a postdoc. But then coming close to the end of grad school, during the last 6 months or so of dissertating, the last thing I wanted to do was go on interviews. So I was like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to interview anywhere else. I already have a postdoc. I'm good. And then came the issue of funding. And
yes. So did you have to find your own funding, or how was that?
So with this lab, I had to, because at the time he didn't have, one of his grants were ending, and he was applying for another one and waiting to hear back. And then I had applied for this other program at Rutgers that would have helped fund my research experience. But then it was also going to take me away from some research by me devoting 30% of my time to some teaching. And a really great opportunity, though, because it was an opportunity where I could get experience teaching some of the underrepresented minority serving institutions around New Jersey, which ultimately I do want to have some kind of influence there. But during postdoc, it's kind of hectic to do that when I'm here trying to, finalize my independent research project, and then half the time I'm over here teaching, And so it was going to be tough, but if that was the only way I was going to get funding for at least the first year or two, and it was a 3-year commitment too. So I was like, okay, maybe.
I'm sorry, is that normal in your field for you to do a 3-year commitment, or no?
So for this program, because it was teaching, I think that's why it was a 3-year commitment.
Oh, okay.
But in general, just a pure research postdoc, I would say yes, actually. Generally in neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience related positions, I would say at the least 2.
Okay.
And most people actually recommend about 3 to 4 years in my field anyways. Seems to be typical. If you're not in luck, you might have to even do 2 3-year postdocs or 2 2-year postdocs. A postdoc could be for a year, because a lot of postdocs, actually, when they put the listing out, it's a 1-year contract. Because you can think of a postdoc as you have this skill that you had in grad school. You can just come in and knock out, papers for a PI, versus a grad student, you work on 1 or 2 projects for 5, 6 years, versus postdoc will come in and work on 5 projects in a year. And so some people kind of see postdocs as just that. And so you can do a postdoc for a year. But I think if you want to really then transition right after that postdoc into having your own lab, it takes a little more than just that. Because you also want to start having NIH funding. So you want to apply for a K99, which is a funding for, actually that also tells you within our field. So a K99, it's 2 years of postdoc funding, and or 2 years, and then 2 years of an R00, which is a pre-faculty member fellowship. So even that is a 4-year fellowship, which tells you need 2 years of training, and then you need 2 years of individual, your own thing at another university. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of leads towards that. But more or less, yeah, so it was, that 3-year program with the teaching. And then again, because I was dissertating, I wasn't trying to go on any other interviews. After the whole not being sure about funding, I was like, well, maybe I should have a backup plan. And I went to conferences, which was insane looking back now, where I went to 2 conferences while I was 6 months away from dissertating. Not even 6 months, 3 months at that point. And while I was at those conferences, people would announce, oh, I'm looking for a postdoc. And if it was someone who was doing, so one of them was the Wayne State guy. and the other one was someone from Stanford, and they were doing pretty much related to what I want to do in Alzheimer's research, using more advanced methods. And so I was like, oh, let me check them out. So after their talk, I would just kind of like send them an email, be like, hey, I heard your talk, and I meet with you to, talk about possibly this opportunity, see if it's a good fit. And so with both of them, I was able to talk to them at the conference, and then we set up like a formal interview after where I visited both campuses. And then I did the official Rutgers interview for the secondary form of funding, I guess. And then on my way back from Stanford, I was flying to Wayne State for my interview. And while I was at Stanford, she essentially, so like I said, so I wanted to do dementia research. And then at the same time, I wanted to do disparities, so like work related to why is dementia more prevalent, or why are Black people and Hispanics at higher risk for dementia than white people. And so they would have been able to give me all the experience for dementia work and more advanced methods, but none of them had the diversity disparities part. So the person at Stanford, she kept telling me in just passing, she's like, oh, have you looked at, Jennifer Manning's work? She's at Columbia. And I was just like, I don't want to go to New York. I don't
want to be in that cold place no more. Busy and cold.
Exactly. And then so I was just like, I'm good. And then so even with Detroit, even though it's cold, at least it was like, again, prioritizing my overall well-being. I was like, well, Detroit is full of Black people, so I'll try. And so it was kind of like, balancing off certain things. And then at least with New Jersey, I was like, well, it's close enough to New York, but I don't have to live in New York. And so that happened. And then eventually I was like, okay, fine, I'll look into her. So towards the end of my interview, I emailed my current mentor now, and I was like, well, hey, the person that I'm interviewing with now may offer me a position, and she just wants me to check in to see, given my interest in what you're doing, maybe you can give me some advice as like from a mentoring perspective, is this a good training opportunity and for helping me get onto the trajectory, because I want to do disparities work, kind of like what you're doing. And so she responded and she was like, actually, yeah, this is what you should be doing. And she pretty much was like, you're not supposed to be doing what these people are doing, more or less. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, thanks for your feedback, kind of thing. And then I was like, are you looking for a postdoc? And she was like, matter of fact, I am. And I was like, oh, okay.
Alignment.
And then exactly. It just kind of like led to one thing. And by the time I spoke to her on the phone, I was finished up my interview in Michigan and flying back home. And then 2 days after that, I was supposed to leave the country. Instead, I came back to PA, drove down to New York, and my interview was like an hour and a half. And then I drove right back to PA. And versus all my other interviews were like 2-3 day long interviews, put me up in a nice hotel, give me good food. And it was the shortest, most hectic, most just crazy interview. But then once I got here and I like heard about the kind of research they were doing, I was like, I need to be here. I was like, I know it's New York, but fine, I'll figure that part out. I need to be here. One thing led to another. I was going to tell everyone my decision that day that I interviewed. So I kind of emailed the top 2 people and was like, hey, I need to make a decision, but some things came up and I need another week or 2, because more or less after interviewing at Columbia, like more or less she pretty much was going to hire me, but then they had to make sure, HR and all that stuff was on par, and like funding and all that stuff, because I didn't have to apply for funding because she's loaded with money. And so luckily I didn't have to apply for funding, but she still had to, make sure everything was on par. And I guess, ask about the other postdocs that I interviewed if I was still, good or whatever. It took like about a week, and then I was also out of the country. And so when I got back, like maybe a week after that, she sent me the decision, and right away I pretty much just told everyone I'm not going, wherever they are. And so it was kind of like one of those, like, definitely like alignment, because it was funny because 2 years before I graduated, one of my lab mates at the time, he was at a conference and he saw this woman presenting, and he took a snapshot of her like bio or something. He sent it to me and he was like, oh, she sounds like, what you want to do. But at the time her bio sounded more like a psychologist. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do all this clinical stuff, like whatever. And so I just ignored it. I didn't even look into her work. I just looked at the picture he sent me. And then now, 2 years later, I had to go all the way to the West Coast for someone to mention her name twice to me. And then here I am. And it couldn't have been a better postdoc. Like, I swear to God, I am like so blessed. It's like everything that I need in a postdoc, everything I need in a mentor, like just like it's a blessing, because I know people complain about their postdocs all the time, but like, I'm respected. I get a lot of opportunities to travel, to work, to do, the things that I actually care about, the kind of research we're doing in the lab. Like, I've never been more passionate about the work that I actually do, like, I want to do it. And it's not just because, it helps Black people. It was more to do with, like,
or is it?
No, it's not. Because think of it this way. So essentially, Blacks and Hispanics tend to have a higher risk for dementia. But all the research that people are doing on dementia include very little bit of Blacks and Hispanics. So if you're not studying the group of people that are most affected, how are you going to understand the disease? So really, it helps everyone, because obviously, like, there's so many clinical trials right now based on the research that's been done on white people that are failing. Why are they failing? Because they don't understand the disease, because they're not studying the people who are most affected anyways. So it's partly, yes, I'm Black, and of course I want to help our people, but also in turn, it helps everyone. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like one of those, like, I'm getting goosebumps just even talking about it. Like, I couldn't be happier where I am. Just the fact that, I ignored it 2 years before. I still interviewed everywhere else, and like still even ignored one of the interviewers when she told me about her name the first time. And then a second time she mentioned her name, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll email her. And, it's just like crazy how it happens. Like, what's yours is yours. Like, nothing is going to come in the way of it.
So, yeah, get into what your focus of your research is now.
My ultimate goal is to use neuroimaging data, which is using MRI data, whether it's understanding the brain, the function of the brain, the structure of the brain, looking at amyloid, tau, and other different measures that are related to dementia, to identify biological sources of disparity. So, like, what are the differences in levels of tau, or
what is tau?
So tau and amyloid are essentially the neurobiomarkers of plaques and tangles related to Alzheimer's. So an autopsy, for example, that when at death, you slice the brain, that's when you see plaques and tangles. And that's really the only official diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, pause. Plaques and tangles. What's a plaque and a tangle?
So essentially, it's more or less like the aggregates of protein in the brain that tend to be more related to dementia and the death of neurons because of whatever the proteins being aggregated abnormally, that tends to lead to, or tends to be present in everyone's brain that has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so instead of waiting until death, neuroimaging, so the MRI, we're able to use PET scans to use different, radiological agents to see the plaques and tangles, or at least the stains that relates to a plaque or a tangle in the brain. And so it's like an unofficial way of saying this person has not Alzheimer's disease per se, but they have the two main things that majority of the people who have Alzheimer's disease tend to have. So like back in the day, this guy named Alzheimer's, he had a patient, and after she died, he sliced her brains up and there were plaques and tangles all over. And years later, it was now associated with Alzheimer's disease. So that's kind of like the biological main biomarkers that people associate with it. And so now using PET imaging, we're able to see that before death. We can see it up until, I think, as young as maybe 40, 50. So then you can kind of predict how this is going to change over time. And so the issue here is that a lot of studies find that Black people may have less tau in their brain, but they're still diagnosed based on their performance on a neuropsychology test. So different batteries testing their cognition. There's different criteria that would essentially make them be demented, more or less. And so you would see this person with low amounts of tau, for example, but just as demented as a white person who has way more levels of tau or amyloid in their brain. And so the issue is some researchers may label that as, we need a different criteria for diagnosing Black people with Alzheimer's. But really, is it that you need a different criteria because their hypothesis is not tested correctly, where you would see higher levels of tau and dementia? They're seeing low levels of tau in Blacks, but they still have dementia. And so my theory, or at least our lab, is that it's not that Black people have a different kind of Alzheimer's or, their brains are somehow some other kind of alienated brain. It's just that there's a lot of other factors that when you, statistically account for everything, a lot of these other factors account for why they're demented. It's not because of the plaques and tangles in their brain per se, but because of, and so this is where my research kind of gets this super integrated, interdisciplinary area where you're looking at more social factors. So you're looking at the influence of childhood SES, so childhood education, adult education, adults' socioeconomic status, looking at discrimination, psychological factors, racism, and all these different experiences. And you actually see that a lot of these factors, when you account for them, those factors predict dementia in Blacks and Hispanics more so than in whites. And what that essentially kind of says is that not officially, but unofficially, these are the things that are causing us to have more dementia. Compared to whites, they just naturally develop plaques and tangles, and that's the thing that relates more to their dementia versus Blacks and Hispanics and other minorities tend to have all these other socioeconomic factors that predict their, progression to dementia or whatever the dementia status is. And so my research ultimately is kind of to use multiple neuroimaging modalities, so whether it's structure, function, plaques, tangles, or I should say amyloid tau measures to identify the sources and the different things that correlate to racial and ethnic differences in cognitive aging and dementia generally. And so right now I'm focusing on just middle age and older adults from mainly Blacks and Hispanics as well as whites, and they get, clinical evaluations as well as these molecular, structural, and functional neuroimaging to kind of put them all together, because our lab is fortunate enough to have one of the largest and best maybe samples of a community-based cohort. So these are people in the community and they're representative of the regular natural Black, Hispanics, white people you see versus a lot of the other studies too, they have people coming from clinics. So their research is from the clinic. But when you think about it, who are the Black people or Hispanic people who go to these clinics? They're not representative of the everyday Black people who have Alzheimer's, And so they tend to be more psychoactive. For example, they may have more psychiatric issues. And so it's just a very muddy sample. And so it's not very representative of the actual disease itself in the regular population. So we are fortunate enough to have multiple samples where we have the people from the community. And then we also have another data set where we collect data on the offsprings of those people in the first study. And so we can kind of look at family history and see how that interacts, with all of that, where they're from, where they grew up, even some stuff where you see people from the South, for example, may have a higher risk for dementia. But even if these people were born in the South and they moved to New York and they've been in New York for 10, 15, 20 years, just the fact that they were born in the South below like the stroke belt, they have a higher risk for dementia. And so there's clearly a lot of other factors that these people are not studying. And so that's kind of where my research comes in. And you can imagine neuroimaging trying to tell a Black person, hey, come let me look at your brain. Like that's not easy. And so I was hoping,
but with a good right, we have the right to be kind of skeptical based on the history.
Definitely do. The whole Tuskegee experiments, syphilis, it's, the list goes on. And so it makes my work a little more difficult, but it even also is more encouraging because then when a participant or a patient comes to the lab and, they see my face, the fact that they're like, oh, you're the one doing this kind of research. It's so encouraging. And I'm like, I was having the worst day ever, but you know what? I'm ready. Let's do this, So I think it's kind of one of those, it takes a lot of work and effort to get the data on minorities. And so that's a lot of reasons why people don't do the research in minorities. But again, they're the ones
it's necessary. It's necessary. So can you tell me what the difference is? Because I'm just kind of confused. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? They're two different things, right?
Yeah, just think of dementia as an umbrella term for all kinds of cognitive issues throughout aging, and Alzheimer's is a type of dementia.
Okay, got it. Cool. What are we taking away from this conversation?
In general, like I said, in order to truly understand Alzheimer's, you have to study everyone. And so I think that's the main thing for me, being able to, because like you said, I think a lot of people hear, oh, you're studying Blacks and Hispanics and you're Black, so that's why you're doing it, right? And I'm
No,
like,
that is why I'm doing it. And what's the problem?
Like, yeah, that is one of the main reasons I'm doing it. Why did you get into it? Isn't it because your white grandma had Alzheimer's? Maybe. Or maybe it's because there's a lot of money in there. I don't know. But yes, that's one of the main reasons I'm doing it. But also, in order for you to understand it, you do need to understand minorities. So I think that's kind of like the big thing. And then in general, again, like my research focuses on more social or different factors in childhood, adulthood, and how those things affect with the biology and, different brain functions that relate to Alzheimer's disease. But in general, there's people showing, different things with exercise, nutrition. There's so many different things that encompass the causes or pathways to Alzheimer's. But really, you would be surprised. I mean, we've been studying Alzheimer's for how long? And we really know nothing about the illness. Because even like the main thing of plaques and tangles, which should be the most studied and understood biological form of Alzheimer's, yes, we say it's Alzheimer's, but then what about the Black people who don't have plaques and tangles in their brains, but they are demented or they are showing, all the signs related to Alzheimer's? And so there's just this big debate about what is Alzheimer's right now, even though you would think we really know what it is. And so I think just understanding it's not fully understood, but there's in general just living an overall holistic lifestyle has been shown to be beneficial in reducing your risk for Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, as minorities, it's looking like a lot of systematic things that are contributing to, what's leading Alzheimer's in minorities. Things like I said, discrimination. And so these are things, for example, you would think there's some things that are modifiable. So for example, if it's because you grew up in a larger family, and so minorities tend to have larger families than white people, and because of resources that, can cause strains. And there's different theories as to how these things interact. But at the end of the day, there's a bigger picture here. It's not just, oh, this is what's causing Alzheimer's in minorities, but in the end, it's going to take a long time to cure or even come up with a really solid plan of reducing Alzheimer's, because a lot of the causes or factors that influence Alzheimer's are on a structural, institutional level that is not going to be easily changed. It's like one of those things like your research can directly influence policy, but we know that takes a long time to get mapped onto each other.
So I just want to say thank you so much for educating us today. Thank you so much. You dropped so much information, and it was so important for us to know more about the disease because it's so prevalent in our community. And I don't know, I just look forward to sharing this information with all of us. So thank you.
This is I love doing this.
Yes.
I really appreciate what you're doing too, because I mean, it's one thing to know that there's so many of us out there, but who hears about the work that we do? Like, who the hell is Indira?
No one. Exactly. No one really knows what we're doing. And it's just sad because there are so many people out there putting themselves out there on social media, right? And it's the people speaking the loudest that aren't talking about anything. And I feel like one of the goals for me is to highlight those women who are truly changing the world, not just getting people to change their clothes, but to change their mind and to change the fact that there is more out there to be and to see than what is pop culture. And again, thank you so much for sharing. It was such a great conversation that I had with you.
Thank you. I had fun. This is always a good, I'm sorry, I talk a lot.
I enjoyed it. You dropped so much information that I truly did enjoy it because I learned so much. So thank you again.
Like, I always get encouraged every time, you go through this and you're like, you know what? This is good. Now let me go finish up this manuscript that I was writing.
Snap.
Thank you so much for listening. She's bomb. All my guests are bomb. She's definitely bomb. If you want to connect with her, please reach out to her on Instagram or Twitter. She is her first and last name, so Indira Turney on both Instagram and Twitter. Go ahead, check her out. I hope you found this episode to be as great as I did. If you want to connect with me, I am at theresearchher.com. All social media, The Research Her. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Got more coming. And I'll see you next time. I holla.